Picture yourself hauling heavy hay bales through another long morning on the farm, the kind that blurs into every other one before it. Then, without warning, something impossible stops you cold. Buried deep in the golden straw, a small patch of pure white catches your eye, completely out of place against the dull, dusty gold around it. And when you lean in for a closer look, what you find waiting inside will completely rewrite the future of your family's old barn. The first light of dawn was just breaking over the green hills of Foscork when Shaun pushed open the creaking wooden door of his barn. Sunlight poured through the gaps in the old timber walls, cutting bright lines through the dust drifting in the air. The familiar smell hit him the way it always did: dry hay, aged wood, damp soil. He walked toward the stacked bales he needed to move that morning, his mind already running through the day's long list of chores. He reached for the rough twine on the nearest bundle, and his hand froze midair. Something white was tucked deep inside the straw, something that clearly didn't belong there. He stood still, unsure what he was even looking at. Then he heard it, a faint, trembling sound, barely more than a breath. He held completely still, listening hard. It came again, a soft, weak chirp, almost swallowed by the rustle of dry hay. Curious, and a little uneasy, he pulled the straw back layer by layer. Two enormous dark eyes stared straight back at him. He jumped, stumbling backward, boots kicking up dust as his heart hammered against his ribs. But as the shock faded, it gave way to something else entirely: wonder. Nestled inside a hollow in the hay were three tiny creatures, huddled close together, their downy feathers so pale they almost seemed to glow in the dim light. Newly hatched barn owls, fragile and impossibly small. "Well, would you look at that?" he whispered, utterly stunned. In all his years working this land, he had never once seen anything like this. The barn owl, a bird wrapped in old countryside legend, had somehow chosen his rundown corner of a barn to raise its young. But as he crouched there, marveling at the nest, something else on the floor pulled his attention away. Scattered across the cold concrete were dozens of small, dark shapes, all completely still. He stepped closer, careful not to startle the chicks above him, and studied the shapes more closely. His face slowly broke into a grin as it clicked. Dead rodents, dozens of them, littering the floor. It all came rushing back to him. Weeks earlier, his farm had been buried under a brutal infestation, rats and mice tearing through his stored grain and chewing through equipment he could barely afford to replace. He'd tried everything: traps, natural repellents, every old trick his father had taught him. Nothing worked. Finally, out of sheer exhaustion, a neighboring farmer had pointed him toward a strong commercial poison, promising it would finish the job for good. Standing there now, staring down at the dead rodents, Shaun felt a heavy wave of relief. His pest problem, it seemed, had solved itself, just not quite how he'd expected. And as he rubbed his chin, dreading the job of cleaning up the mess, an idea struck him, one that felt almost too perfect. What if the owls could simply eat what was already there? A free, endless food source right on their doorstep. In that moment, uninformed, hopeful, and completely wrong, Shaun convinced himself he'd stumbled onto the perfect natural solution. The owls would hunt his pests, and the pests would feed the owls. A clean, self-sustaining cycle he hadn't even had to plan. He had no idea how badly that one careless assumption was about to backfire. With his mind still buzzing, a new problem settled in. He still needed to move those hay bales before planting season, but doing that now risked terrifying the mother owl and destroying the nest before it even had a chance. Shaun knew every corner of this farm. It had belonged to his family for generations, but this discovery made him look at the place differently, like he was seeing it for the first time in years. He remembered his grandfather's stories about barn owls being common decades ago, a sharp contrast to how rare they'd become now. The weight of that history settled heavily on him. He knew he couldn't push the owls out for his own convenience, so he made the call to pause all work in that section of the barn, giving the small family the quiet they desperately needed to settle in. As he backed slowly out and pulled the heavy door shut, he thought about the strange contrast between the fragile new life above him and the harsh realities waiting for him outside. That same morning, his wife Mary was surprised to see him walking back toward the house so early. He couldn't hide his excitement as he told her about the owls now living in their barn. Mary lit up almost instantly, suggesting they build the birds a proper, safe, permanent home. Shaun hesitated, caught between his old farmer's instinct to leave wild things alone and his wife's genuine eagerness to help. At first, he wanted to simply step back and let nature run its course. But Mary's enthusiasm, paired with her surprisingly convincing arguments, slowly wore down his resistance. Over tea, that morning, he started to see the real appeal: natural pest control that never asked for a paycheck, and a genuine boost for a local ecosystem that had been quietly struggling for years. For weeks afterward, Shaun deliberately kept his distance from the nest, trusting, wrongly, tragically, that the pile of dead rodents would be enough to keep the owls fed. Still, he couldn't shake the growing sense of responsibility settling over him. In the evenings, he buried himself in research, reading up on owl diets, sketching plans for a proper nesting box, and reaching out to anyone who might know more: friends, the local pet shop owner, even a retired veterinarian. His excitement kept building, but so did something heavier underneath it: a real gnawing sense of duty. He understood these were a protected species that needed genuine, careful attention, not just good intentions. He was determined to give them everything they needed to survive. A week later, that nagging feeling finally pushed him to break his own rule and check on the nest again. He was hit immediately by a rotten smell hanging in the still air, and then by a sight that turned his stomach. The chicks, once glowing white, were now a sickly, dull gray. The pile of dead rodents on the floor hadn't been touched at all. He knelt down and examined the chicks closely, and the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Matted feathers, eyes clamped shut, no response at all. Something was seriously wrong. He was baffled. They clearly hadn't eaten a single one of the dead rats around them. Then, a weak sound from the far corner of the barn pulled his attention away. The mother owl was lying motionless on the ground, barely breathing. Panic took over. Shaun called Birdwatch Ireland with shaking hands, and a representative named Donald arrived within the hour. Walking him through the barn, Donald listened carefully as Shaun admitted, visibly shaken, that he'd used chemical pest control weeks earlier, genuinely believing the owls would simply benefit from the leftover rats. Donald's expression shifted instantly, concern hardening into something more serious. "So you're telling me the owls might have eaten prey that had the poison in its system?" he asked, his voice low and heavy. Shaun nodded, pale. "I don't know for certain, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me. I kept the poison itself locked away, but maybe that's not where the problem came from." Donald searched the barn and quickly found the empty poison container tucked behind a stack of tools, confirming exactly what he'd feared. "The mother didn't touch the dead ones on the floor," Donald explained gently but firmly. "This kind of poison doesn't act instantly. It takes days. During that time, the poisoned rodents get slow and easy to catch. She wasn't eating the dead ones. She was hunting live prey to bring back for her chicks, and that prey was already contaminated. It's called secondary poisoning." The guilt hit Shaun like a physical blow. "I really thought I was helping them," he said, his voice breaking. Donald tried to offer some reassurance. "I believe that, but these chemicals stay active inside an animal's body even after it dies. That's what makes them so dangerous further up the food chain." He turned his attention back to the weakened birds. "We need to get them help right now." Shaun agreed instantly, his heart lodged in his throat. Donald carefully administered an antidote to each of the surviving owls. Then came the hardest part. "I can't promise you they'll pull through," he said quietly. "This is about all we're able to do for them right now. And if they don't make it," Shaun asked, barely able to get the words out, "then we'll make sure they're treated with the care and respect they deserve," Donald said gently. Standing there together, listening to the faint, weak hoots still coming from the nest, something shifted inside Shaun, quiet and permanent. "I never wanted any of this to happen," he said, his voice cracking. Donald nodded slowly. "Nature doesn't always give us clean answers. Good intentions can still cause real harm. But that doesn't mean we can't try to fix it." Donald used the moment to teach Shaun everything he probably should have known from the start: proper owl care, safe habitat setup, and why chemical pesticides are so dangerous near wildlife. "Let's spend the rest of today learning this properly," he offered. Shaun agreed without hesitation. The barn quietly became a classroom for the rest of that day. Donald walked him through diets, habitat needs, and the importance of keeping the space free of harmful chemicals going forward. By the time the sun dipped below the hills, Shaun was exhausted, but he felt more purposeful than he had in a long time. Over the following week, he visited the barn every single day, holding tightly onto hope even when it felt foolish to do so. Slowly, almost unbelievably, the owls began to recover. Their feathers regained their soft shine, their eyes brightened, and Shaun often found himself talking to them quietly, almost like old friends. Mary noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. He seemed lighter, more grounded, more genuinely connected to the land than she'd seen him in years. She knew, without needing to ask, that this experience had changed something fundamental in him for good. Determined to make things right, Shaun put everything he'd learned into practice. He carefully designed and built a proper enclosure in a quiet corner of the barn. A sturdy wooden structure with a dedicated nesting area and a separate perch built for hunting practice as the young owls grew. But he didn't stop there. Fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, he bought more lumber and built 2 additional owl boxes, mounting them carefully across different corners of the property. He wanted to make sure future generations of owls would always have a safe, protected place to call home on his land. Standing back after driving in the last nail, Shaun looked over his finished work with a mix of quiet pride and deep humility. He had come dangerously close to destroying something rare and irreplaceable, all through simple ignorance and good intentions gone wrong. But he'd been given a real chance to make it right, and he'd taken it fully, with both hands. Shaun's journey from unintentional harm to genuine wildlife protector stands as a powerful reminder of just how fragile the natural balance around us really is, and how quickly even the best intentions can go badly wrong without the right knowledge behind them. Have you ever had an unexpected encounter with wildlife that completely changed the way you see the natural world? How did you learn to safely share your space with the wild animals living near your home? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.